We are live. Hello, everybody. Paul Blanchard here, president of Habit Finder, with our weekly show, Disrupt Your Week. Happy to be here representing Habit Finder. Get an opportunity to come in here every week to talk about the patterns of your brain, to talk about the things that it can do to support you in creating your dreams, accomplishing your goals, the things that it can do to sabotage you, some of the areas that are not being optimized. This is just an incredible place to operate, because we realized a long time ago that most people are spending time in the fringes of their personal development. They're focusing just on their behavior, just on their emotional intelligence. Both things are incredibly important. But the biggest impact on all of those things is the brain. That's what is sending the signals. That is what is creating the patterns. That is what is assuming what could happen next based on what has already happened in the past. And Habit Finder, we want to dive into and realize that one of the greatest assets that we have, one of the greatest things we can learn, is to unlearn. Okay, research has shown that about 95% of your brain is developed by age 6, meaning after you're 6 years old. That is far more valuable to unlearn than it is to learn. Thank you, Patty Ann. That we want to be able to disrupt. We want to be able to change patterns. We want to be able to make sure that, as Og Mandino said 60 years ago in The Greatest Salesman in the World, that we don't let our brains mark out a path that threatens to imprison our future. Because the brain at its core operates entirely in patterns. And those patterns can be very difficult to decipher, because there's what you're thinking, and there's what you're actually thinking, and then there's what you think you're thinking. And then there's what you're experiencing, what you think you're experiencing, and then what you're actually experiencing. There are multi-dimensions, multi-facets, and many of us in personal development and growth and trying to accomplish what we want to create have been given two options: spin around in circles, or just power through it and go through all the misery and struggle that you possibly can, because somehow at the end of that rainbow is going to be what you want. There are better ways to do this if we can understand what's going on under the surface. Habit Finder gets us that opportunity, and then I get the opportunity to come in and be the disruptor, to be able to help you unlearn some things. Not entirely. We're not looking to completely erase everything, to reset. We just want to, using a self-described geek term, we want to defrag. Okay, we want to defrag the mess of our mind, the contradictions, the patterns that are working against themselves. And that's what I love to do here every Wednesday, is to dive into what you're thinking, how you're thinking, and what kind of an impact that's having on your life. Because obviously, if you're not taking action, none of this matters. And one of the risks we run in terms of a session like this, or working with coaches, or going to events, or whatever it might be, is that we have an unlimited capacity for concepts. And concepts are really tricky, because they can give us a dopamine hit. We can get a euphoric experience from a concept. In fact, they're most commonly called an aha. We even have a cute name for them, or a breakthrough mentally. But there's a massive difference between your brain grabbing onto a concept and going, aha, or, oh, I just experienced breakthrough. There's an immeasurable distance between that chemical response in the brain, and it feels good. It feels encouraging. And that's not bad, but it does present risks that's where the concept ends, that we leave events with notebooks that are way smarter than we actually are. Because concepts can be unlimited, but integration is very difficult. We want to be able to always be biased to integration. And integration creates incredible challenges. Integration is met with resistance from a brain that just wants your life to be predictable. We want our life to be the things we desire, the things we want. Your brain doesn't take the aesthetic elements of that. It doesn't care about the size of house you live in. It cares that it knows it's going to wake up in the same house every day. It doesn't care that you don't have the promotion you think you deserve. It just wants to wake up every day knowing that you still resent that you don't have it, because that's what it's gotten used to experiencing. That's what it's driving, is predictability. Not necessarily what we rank as our most desirable or least desirable outcomes in our life, just the predictability that it wants, okay? And so the opportunity to be able to drive through that, to be able to make an impact in that, to be able to disrupt that is very important. And that's what we want to do today. And today we're taking on a very particular piece that we want to disrupt because it gets talked about a lot. And like many, many things that get talked about a lot, I love to come in and poke at it. I love to come in and show the other side of the coin, not because it shouldn't be talked about. Today we're talking about routine. We're talking about routines, morning routines, daily routines, evening routines, any kind of routines you've got. We're talking about routines. And I'm not here, I repeat, I'm not here to tell you to stop routines. I'm not here to tell you that you should avoid routines. No, like many great things taught in books about habits, books about structure and organization, routines can be incredibly helpful. But just like any incredibly helpful thing, we're going to want to be aware of the risks involved. For example, it's amazing to get married to someone. I would never tell anyone to not get married. But that brings incredible risks, incredible challenges. And if we try to la-di-da through that relationship without the awareness of those risks, so we know where we're going to want to make investments, where we're going to want to work through things, where we're going to want to lean into the resistance, then we're going to miss the opportunity to have the best possible marriage that we could have, for example. So today we're talking routines, and we're going to disrupt some patterns not so that we can be anti-routine. That's not the point. Other things that we've disrupted in the show, positivity. But that doesn't mean I'm anti-positivity. I'm just anti-people getting fixated on a tunnel vision, insular idea that life should just be looked at in a positive vein, and you should only surround yourself with positive people. If you have done that, you likely haven't gone anywhere. You likely haven't grown and become more successful. You don't want to surround yourself with positive people. You want to surround yourself with productive people. Now, are productive people have positivity in them and good perspective? 100%. But I know a ton of positive people that aren't going anywhere, that are just putting new coats of fresh paint on rotting fence posts and sugar on crap and whatever else you want to call it, okay? So we've talked about positivity. We've talked about personalities. We've talked about personality tests, not because they're bad, not because I'm anti, but because there are some incredible risks to the way that our brains get fixated on labels and make it difficult to be able to grow and to be able to become better. And today we're taking on routines with the same idea in mind, that this is not Paul's anti-routine rant. Okay? Routines are fantastic. Let's just understand the risks. Let's talk a little bit about, first and foremost, the word routine. Those of you that listen to me frequently and consistently know that I love etymology. I love the root of words. It oftentimes gives us some wonderful impact, some wonderful ideas to understand the risks and the actual true nature of where these principles actually came from. So, interestingly enough, routine is defined as a beaten path or a usual course. A beaten path or a usual course. Right off the bat, before we even dive in any further, are any of you interested in being beaten or being usual? Just stop for a second and think about that. Are you interested in being beaten or usual? Og talked about how we were not born into this life for failure. And often that's our perception of failure. A lot of times we fall and we believe it's a fail. And so then we take too much time to just stand back up. If we knew it was just a fall, we'd stand back up. Because we interpret it as a fail, we stay on the ground fearful that it's game over and that we're not worthy and that we can't do this. So honestly, do we want to live a life of being beaten and being usual? Because the greatest successes I know, and as I qualify every time, I don't just mean in their bank account. I'm not interested in a singular measurement of success. I mean in their bank account, in their heart account, in their family account, in their philanthropy account, in their spiritual account. They're finding fulfillment and success, not because it's the perfect, ideal, Pleasantville, everything's wonderful kind of ideal, but they are growing in as balanced a way as they can in all of these areas. I've never met someone who has accomplished greater and greater levels of success in those multifaceted, multidimensional areas that wasn't unusual. Unusual in decision, unusual in perspective, unusual in behavior, unusual in desires. And definitely very difficult to find someone successful and fulfilled that has been beaten, that has been conquered, that has been taught to believe that they are never going to get what they want. So right off the bat, we're going to want to understand that as warm, fuzzy blankets routines can be, if we are creators, meaning we are not planning to do the same thing every day for the rest of our lives. We would like to grow. We would like to become better. We would like to meet new people and help them grow and become better. We would like to experience other things and go other places, to be able to, not to escape, but to be able to grow, to be able to create. Then you will want to be unusual. And you will want to address routines as appropriately as you can, but be careful to not become blinded to them. The very act of creating a routine plays right into the hands of your predictable brain. Because as soon as something becomes a routine, it can let off the gas a little bit. It can plan on it just naturally occurring, which is what your brain would prefer. That's why it wants your life to be predictable. Even if you're not enjoying it, if it can be predictable, it can plan on the same types of neural processes and pathways to happen every day. And so it doesn't take as much to manage it. If you've ever managed a team or managed a business, if you know, okay, what's going to happen every day, then you don't have to be as much on your toes. You don't have to be as aware, because you know this is going to happen and this is going to happen, like Groundhog Day, when he's going through, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then he steps back and the car goes by, and then he steps forward. Like, it just doesn't take as much effort. Therefore, it doesn't take as much consciousness, doesn't take as much growth and disruption to be able to get better. That's what we're talking about in terms of routines. Now, is the path irrelevant? No. I'm a big fan of Robert Frost's poem about the road less traveled, where he said, 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. He carefully examined them, took a look at them, and then epically and eternally said at the end, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Now, here's an interesting piece I don't think everyone considers in terms of the road less traveled. In the perspective of the person being talked about and represented in the poem, 2 roads diverged. That doesn't necessarily mean it was a 90-degree fork. It just means they diverged. They started going slightly different directions. But I would not be shocked if we were able to take an aerial view of the road less traveled, that it still went a similar direction to the beaten path, to the road that was more traveled. A similar direction, yet a totally different experience. A similar direction, yet a totally different experience. That is the punchline of the joke today. That is the moral of the story. Everything else we're going to talk about is understanding that we're not looking to take the road less traveled because it goes the opposite direction of everybody else and everything else. But it is a completely different experience. I wouldn't be shocked if the road less traveled that made all the difference, you could still at times see the beaten path. Every once in a while, come to the stream and be, oh, there it is. And then it goes off and you're like, wow, I feel like I'm in a totally different area, totally different place. And then, oh, there it is. Again, the aerial view that you've got the beaten path and you've got the one that you are going to choose. And they are not necessarily going to totally different places. They are totally different experiences. That's what we want to understand about routines and what they can rob us of if we're not careful. Not because the routine robs us, but because our brain that's just looking to power down and have the things that it can plan on and are predictable, and then feel traumatized when things don't play out that way. We're fighting our brain wanting us to be predictable when the very nature of creation, the very nature of growth is unpredictable. That's what creates the growth. That's what creates the evolution. Now, the other thing Robert Frost makes clear in this poem is that the reader, the person who chose the road less traveled, wasn't in a hurry. That's a really critical thing, okay? We don't want to be in a hurry on either road. But the biggest thing I want you to understand is that we don't want to look for the anti-routine. We just want to be aware that routines, okay, are not necessarily forever. We will want to find other paths that are of similar principle but create different experiences. And that's why I'd like to offer to you today a way to be able to alter and evaluate and enhance your routines. And that is, stop looking at them as routines as they've been traditionally taught, and start looking at them as experiments. Experiments. The core of an experiment is to experience, to try, to risk. And I get it. Yoda muddied the water a long time ago when he said, do or do not, there is no try. That was a very particular context into what he was trying to teach Luke Skywalker right at that time, and that has been blown out of proportion in terms of the actual essence of life. The most beautiful thing you can do in life is try. And the compassion that comes from trying rather than having to do or you don't do it. You either win or you're a loser. Oh my gosh, that's tearing lives apart. That's ridiculous. Okay, Thomas Edison was a loser thousands of times, and then finally was able to discover the light bulb. There are plenty of other people in the world who'd had thousands of experiments and never accomplished it, never won. So was that not worthwhile for them to try? No, because they probably went on to something else and created it. Or they probably learned something about themselves, whether they actually got a light bulb at the end of it or not. There are so many different ways to win that if we're going to sum it down to some Star Wars reference and rob ourselves of the opportunity of experimenting and challenging and disrupting and feeling unstable and feeling like we don't know who we are anymore on purpose, that's where the beauty of life is found. That's where the road is less traveled, but it is still a similar direction to the beaten path. Many have come before us that have blazed trails that we don't necessarily need to go blaze again in terms of direction. This is the best way to get around that mountain. Excellent. That doesn't mean we can't explore as we go that direction. As I've been thinking about this morning, I keep thinking about snowmobiling, which is one of my favorite things to do. And you'll follow a beaten path. And we'll go all the way up to St. Charles Peak, one of the highest peaks in the Wasatch Mountains, where I love to snowmobile, where people come from all over the world to snowmobile, and then we'll come back down. And there are those who just follow the path. And then there's me, who's all over the place. I want to experience that hill. I want to experience those woods. I want to fly off that cliff. All these different things. It's taken me time to be able to build up the stamina, the know-how to not do that recklessly, but to be able to have a reckless spirit with a sturdy mind. A reckless spirit with a sturdy mind, so that I can blaze my own paths, but go in a similar direction to the beaten one, where I can always check in and see that we're headed the right direction or headed back to the right direction. Yet we get back to the lodge, and a whole lot more gas needs to go in my snowmobile than anybody else's, because I was everywhere. My experience, even though I went to the same place as someone else and came back as someone else, my experience was different because of my willingness to experiment, my willingness to risk and try. And routines are important. Routines of checking the safety of the snowmobile, making sure you've got all your equipment, that you've got the safety things in place, okay? A reckless spirit with a sturdy mind. A reckless spirit with a sturdy mind. to be able to experience and experiment, to be able to disrupt our routines. Because a lot of us get stuck in a routine that are creators, that are free spirits, and we start to feel claustrophobic. We start to feel trapped. It's not very hard for the brain to go, okay, I've been doing this for 6 weeks. I'm going to have to do this forever. Well, no, not necessarily. We want to be able to give ourselves permission. We want to be able to give ourselves permission to, we want to give ourselves permission to be able to experience things, to be able to stay on the routines as needed. But what I want to do, apologize, just got disrupted myself. I want to give you 3 keys to experimentation. If you're going to challenge your routines, I've done sessions on this before about the dangers of a morning routine versus a morning experience and experimenting. That doesn't mean it needs to be a totally different direction from the beaten path. Again, those of you just joining us, we're talking about disrupting your routines so that you can have experiments. That an experiment is far more powerful. An experiment is the road less traveled that Robert Frost talked about. But if we took an aerial view of the road less traveled, it probably goes a very similar direction to the beaten path. But we don't want to be beaten. We don't want to be usual. Okay, we want to be of reckless spirit and sturdy mind and be unusual. We want to understand that we were born into this world for victory, which requires struggle, requires conquering, and requires acquiring habits, acquiring ability. But just like great companies that acquire top positions in the marketplace, our brain does the same thing the company does. Ooh, things have never been so good. And so they become less aware. They become less innovative. They become less agile. And then someone sneaks up behind them. And by that point, it's too late. It's tough to get the momentum going. It's tough to get back on our toes. We're never going to want to miss this. There are times where routine is important. There are times where recovery is super important. Are we staying in a disrupted state, constantly calibrating to find out which is which and what is the right time for what? If you've got a routine that is exhausting you, take a break. But find an experiment that can keep you headed in a similar direction. And then you can come back into it, whether that's social media, whether that's how you run your teams. It's not about just sitting down and no longer traveling down the path. It's about being able to change things up that'll light up parts of your brain and ignite parts of your soul that started to kind of from the routine, because that's what we naturally do. Brain loves routines because then it doesn't take as much power, as much agility, as much challenge, which is how we create, how we grow, how we evolve. Take away the resistance and the challenges. There's no need for evolution. There's no need for improvement. So that's why we want to constantly assess our routines. And sometimes the tremendous relief that comes from no longer trying to beat yourself to death with routines that aren't feeding your soul, and go and find an experiment. But here's 3 things I want to make sure you understand, because this can be dangerous. Just like routines getting us locked into a claustrophobic closet that doesn't allow us to create in our lives, that causes things to get more boring and takes the spice out of life. Jumping to the other side of the tracks and just, blowing your routines apart is not what I'm suggesting either. So here's 3 things I want you to take into account as you look to disrupt your routines with experiments. Number 1, find the resistance and go a little longer. Find the resistance and go just a little bit longer. We don't want to avoid resistance. That's one of the dangers of the wild, wild west of experimentation, okay? We want to lean into resistance. Okay, I've spent a lot of my time working out in a gym. It's one of my cornerstone habits. I love exercise. And there are people who go into a gym to get a workout done. And there are people who go into a gym to experiment, meaning they actually want to experience the workout. The person who wants to get the workout done does the appropriate amount of time on the machine, does the appropriate amount of reps with the weights, okay, does the appropriate routine. The person who takes the road less traveled, uses that as a guide, as a reference point, but realizes that the experience is what matters. Meaning I could do 10 reps with that particular weight and that particular exercise and finish it. And whatever, check, done, I did my 10 reps. But if you really want to get stronger, you really want to be more agile, you really want to be more flexible, you've got to find the point of resistance and go a little bit further. That might be changing how those 10 reps are done. That may be changing the weight that it's done with. That may even be doing a few more reps than you were planning. That's not, okay, my prescribed plan is 10 reps, so I'm going to do 100 necessarily. But at the same time, how many people get to 10 and like, boom, done, versus the person who gets to 10 and they just feel their muscles light up. Like, ooh, there's the resistance. There's that ache. There's that piece. And they go just a little bit further. Not a lot further. That risks injury, but just a little bit further. Because they're conscious to the experience, not the routine of getting it done. Routines become box checking very quickly, and we start diminishing the experience. So pay attention to your routines. That doesn't mean routines are bad. Again, just be aware that you'll want to disrupt. You'll want to take a less beaten path, but sends it a similar direction. Sometimes, if you're really focused on a particular technical aspect, like social media, where we have a course that takes you through a 6-week routine, well, it might be important that you take a break after that routine and not do anything, but maybe go experiment with some of the things that you learned in those 6 weeks and try doing something a little bit different for a week or two, or slowing things down a little bit, or whatever it might be, so that we don't get locked into the routine, so it can be exciting to go through it again, looking to notice something that we didn't notice before, but to be able to throw things off. So find the resistance and go just a little bit longer. That's how we grow. That's how we get better. That's how we keep our experience alive inside of a routine with a brain that wants to lower our consciousness in the process. Number 2, okay? Number 2 is avoid rebellious experiments. Don't create an experiment from an energy of rebellion where, oh yeah, they've been saying in all of our trainings that you have to do it this way. So I'm going to show them. I'm going to go experiment and do it this way. And we take a 90-degree turn. Be really careful, because even if that could work, if you're doing it because of resent or rebellion, if you're bringing that in your pack to go hike down that road less traveled, it's going to crush you. Even if where you're going could create a wonderful discovery, we're going to severely diminish our experience if it's poisoned with rebellion and resent. And that's the challenge, isn't it? A lot of us wake up to being in routines. We get resentful about it. We feel like we're trapped. We feel like, oh my gosh, I became an entrepreneur so that I could have freedom, and yet I'm being told what to do. And we get this resentful, rebellious energy, and then we go down the road less traveled, and we end up going a completely different direction than we needed to. Or even if we did go down a direction that would lead to a wonderful discovery, we die along the way before we're even able to come back and tell people about it, because we poison the journey with resent and rebellion. So be cautious to avoid rebellious and resentful detours of experimentation. Number 3, compassion, patience, and curiosity are required equipment. If you are going to challenge yourself, disrupt yourself, you're going to shake the snow globe of your brain and make sure that you don't ever fall into a beaten path as a usual course. You will not settle to be a beaten, usual person. Then you will want to be just as good and just as amazing at wielding the tools of compassion, patience, and curiosity as you are with your courageous, wild heart of wanting to change things up. I naturally like adrenaline. I like things that scare me. I like all that kind of stuff. But I realized that without the diligence of enhancing and challenging and growing my compassion, my curiosity, and my patience, that I'm going to become my own worst enemy. The path of disruption, the path of creation, the path of evolution and growth on an intentional level that we're talking about is not necessarily for everyone. Take it in small doses, one little step at a time, one little experiment at a time, so that you can assess that your wild heart, that your desires to grow and become more in this world and to help others do the same never outpaces your compassion, your curiosity, and your patience for others and for yourself. The last thing you want to do is find the fruits of taking the road less traveled and how amazing it is, and start making people who are on the beaten path feel bad. Or even better, even worse, not wanting to be around them because now you're better than they are. Or turning around and looking at your spouse and being like, oh my gosh, they're on the beaten path. I need to get them over here. And then suddenly all they feel like is that you only care about them if they tap into their potential, if they go on the same path as you. Understand that as we grow, as we break molds, as we become and tap into more and more of our potential, that is a very personal experience. And it's not your right to come and take your personal experience and force it on anyone else. In fact, because you've been able to do that, it should empower you to be able to hold space for others who have not. Because they're not going to be inspired to do that themselves because you told them to. We want to be compassionate, curious, and patient for ourselves, and realize that that's what allows us to be that for others. Said many times to make sure we never become too holy for the sinner. Make sure you don't become so enlightened and so disruptive and so whatever that other people that seem to be like sheep just annoy you. Man, you totally missed the point. Totally missed the opportunity. Totally missed the foundation of this all, of love. Doesn't mean you have to spend every day with those people. Doesn't mean you have to pour in tons of time with those people. But the energy we bring around all people should be that of compassion, curiosity, and patience for ourselves and others, to set the right boundaries, to be able to have the clarity, and to be able to be there when we need it most, when we're disrupting ourselves and inspiring others to do the same. So, allow us to understand that the brain is already naturally looking for routine. You already have routines. You'll want to examine whether they are serving you or not. And I don't mean the routines because of the book you read and the miraculous morning you're having now for the last 3 mornings, and it'll be tough to maintain for the next 3 weeks, and then you're going to beat yourself up when you don't, and then it's going to be the next book that you need to implement. No, let's just start seeing experiments. Experiments should be given the appropriate amount of time. Okay? We don't want to just hop in and out of experiments. We've got to find that resistance and then go a little bit longer. Just like we'll want to do in the gym, just like we'll want to do in our lives. We'll want to challenge the routines to keep our consciousness up. But when you need to rest, rest. Don't rest out of rebellion. Don't rest out of resent, because you won't actually get to recover. You'll just shut down, then turn back on, and you'll be right where you were when you shut down, and it'll be even more frustrating at that point because you will have been convinced that you should be feeling better now. Be patient, be compassionate, be curious, and look for and find courage in the experimentations of your life and the experimentations of our connection with others. Thanks so much for listening today. Appreciate your time. We're here on Facebook and Clubhouse every week as for now, and hope to see you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.